collateral damage, potentially hitting civilians. And of course, our airspace is our airspace for a reason, right? There are a number of commercial and private jets and aircraft that are certainly in the sky. Also important to note the very significant geopolitical implications here, because tensions with China are already high.
Yes.
And it's possible, once we're retrieving the wreckage, that we could find indeed that China is responsible for the other objects, although unclear at this time, except for the first. So a lot of information still needs to be assessed.
Yeah, and there's not clear if there's clear video of this one. We know that because there was such clear video over the one that happened over South Carolina. The balloon, the shape, you could see the cameras even. It was pretty detailed as to what was going on in terms of the fighter jets that were circling it before eventually downing that balloon, and then the ongoing effort to recover the debris. This one is not as clear as to what they exactly shot down, at least not yet, because it's all happening just minutes ago. So this is late breaking news, basically going on the tweets from our representatives and passing those on to you and getting more information. We hope to speak with Representative Slotkin at a later time and hopefully bring that to you later this evening. But we're just trying to break you the news as it comes into you, so you know, so you have a good idea of what's happening. When we're seeing now some of those tweets as they're happening in regards to the object that was shot down over Lake Huron just a few hours ago.
Yeah, Senator Gary Peters, the Governor Gretchen Whitmer, also responding. I have one in front of me from Representative Jack Bergman, who says, I've been in contact with DOD regarding operations across the Great Lakes region today. The U.S. military has decommissioned, in his words, another object over Lake Huron. I appreciate the decisive action by our fighter pilots. The American people deserve far more answers than we have. A number of questions, particularly coming from Republicans, is why it took so long for the first object to be shot down. Clearly, that seems to not be the case with these additional objects that we're seeing in our skies. It seems that military officials are taking pretty decisive and pretty quick action in bringing down these objects, despite the reason that we were given for the long delay. I mean, it was almost a week, about a week, 7 or 8 days before that first balloon was shot out of the sky. We're now looking at images of that. And it's not like
they didn't know where it was, because they were following a detailed trajectory of where that was. They claimed that they didn't want to harm anybody by shooting it down over, they want to make sure it was over open water before shooting it down. Obviously, now they're working in conjunction with other countries, just, Canada, for example, working in conjunction to shoot down the one on Saturday. And then now I'm getting the tweet from Governor Gretchen Whitmer that you saw flash across your screen moments ago. She tweets out, our national security and safety is always a top priority. I've been in contact with the federal government and our partners who were tracking an object near our airspace. I'm glad to report that it has been swiftly and safely and securely taken down. The Michigan National Guard stands ready.
And 48 minutes ago, Senator Gary Peters, as you saw again, flash there it is coming up. He says, I have been in touch with the Pentagon, DHS, and FAA regarding the closure of airspace over the Great Lakes. I'm glad the object was neutralized over Lake Huron, and I'll continue pressing DOD for transparency. There's that word transparency once again. What are the American people being told about what's going on here? What should be shared with us? What could compromise our national security? What is considered an official national security breach? And the reality is that if any of these flying objects are, in addition to the first one, which we thought was a Chinese spy balloon, if any of those objects are some kind of spy device, that is an incursion into our national sovereignty.
Right.
So how, as Americans, are we going to respond to not just a threat, but an obvious attack on our own borders?
Yeah.
It's a very serious topic that a lot of Americans are very focused on.
And of course, as we hopefully get that briefing from the Pentagon, maybe we'll learn a little bit more about the timeline. Why is this all happening in succession, this one? Rapid succession, one after the other. How long have they been up there? How long have we known about it, as you mentioned? So again, waiting on information from the Pentagon, not clear as to what it will reveal, but hopefully it will be more information than what we're getting right now, which is simply going based on representatives with contacts in the Department of the Defense talking about what was shot down today over Lake Huron.
Senator Debbie Stabenow also tweeting, essentially many of these lawmakers saying pretty much the same thing. She also tweeted that she's been in contact with the Department of Defense and is monitoring the situation over the Great Lakes, and sends her thanks to our military for shooting down the object above Lake Huron, and FAA News for keeping our aircraft safe. She says she'll continue to be in contact with DOD for answers here.
Yeah, we're still working on those other aircrafts that were shot down, over the past week or so here, and we're hearing from Fox News that there is a team right now in Canada after the F-22 shot down that object on Saturday. So they're combing the area with the assistance of Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He says that recovery teams are on the ground looking to find and analyze that object. So, there's probably going to be very limited information because simply we're in the recovery effort for a lot of this. Little is known. Clearly, they are able to monitor these flying aircrafts and deploy the necessary F-22s to take them down with regularity, but where they are coming from or what their purpose is, that probably will not be released in the Pentagon briefing. I can't imagine, but you never know. Again, we're hoping to have that soon and get a little bit more information once we do get that.
Another important thing for us to take note of is that obviously there are a number of officials on both the U.S. and the Canadian side who are now looking for wreckage from these objects, because analyzing that wreckage is going to be clearly important for ascertaining exactly what kind of devices these are. Officials did say that the last object that was shot down using a Sidewinder missile in U.S. had an altitude of 20,000 feet, where it could have potentially interfered with domestic air traffic, something that we were talking about just a moment ago.
That's scary stuff if you have flight plans anywhere.
No kidding.
I wouldn't want to be going to the airport, anytime soon, knowing that these things are happening with such regularity.
Yeah, I would agree. We're hoping that the Pentagon will give us some additional information, at least on what their recovery efforts are at this time and how long that will take. Obviously, the security of American citizens should be at the top of the list. Once these balloons come down, these devices come down, certainly it could take maybe weeks, maybe months to determine what the purpose of the objects is.
Yeah, and Fox News is reporting that the two other objects that were shot down most recently were smaller than the one that was shot down on the 4th. Again, what are these things, and what sort of information are they trying to ascertain? So a lot of questions here, and you heard from our lawmakers. Just to recap, again, Representative Alyssa Slotkin coming out with a tweet saying that an object was down today by the U.S. Air Force and National Guard who carried out a mission to take down something that was flying over Lake Huron. They say that she and other lawmakers say that there are more questions than answers here.
And we also want to let you know that obviously, as we were talking about some of the collection that has to go on now, Canadian counterparts, we're told, are trying to now piece together, for example, what was shot down over the Yukon. It's too early for us to know what's happening with this particular device that was shot down over Lake Huron. But if you can kind of extrapolate some of what the Canadians are doing in recovery, that might tell us what they might do to recover the debris over Lake Huron. And so we're told the territory there is pretty sparsely populated, and so it can be super cold. That's another thing we have to consider in getting into the water and retrieving the wreckage. Yeah,
assuming it floats too, right? I mean, I guess a balloon would, and we saw that they were pretty successful in recovering a large portion of the one that was shot down over South Carolina. So hopefully they have similar luck in recovering and analyzing the debris from these latest things, so we could get some answers here. And just to point out again that this was shot down over Lake Huron. Hours prior, the FAA restricted airspace over Lake Michigan near Wisconsin for national defense reasons. So we don't know, again, what prompted them to do that, but the FAA made similar flight restrictions ahead of the operations to shoot down the spy balloon. So similar tactics were taken before what we saw in South Carolina. Obviously, it didn't escalate to that level yet over Lake Michigan, but it did over Lake Huron. So it's not clear if that object simply migrated from Lake Michigan over to Lake Huron, which they are not far apart, depending on which portion of Lake Huron this was shot down on. So it's possible that those two are related, and it's possible that they're not. Again, it's just too early to tell. But happening almost simultaneously, shutting down airspace over Lake Michigan, then shooting down a craft of some sort over Lake Huron today.
Yeah, and another thing that we're seeing the U.S. government sort of have to grapple with is lawmakers asking questions, as we mentioned before, about the degree of transparency with the American people. Certainly, a number of senators have been grilling Pentagon officials over why information was kept from the American people for so long. A State Department official did say earlier this week that the U.S. is exploring options to take actions against the Chinese military and entities supporting the balloon spying operation from that first balloon we saw that was shot down. And, you have to also take into account what China is saying about this, that it wasn't a spy balloon, that it wasn't being used for surveillance. Of course, the U.S. government is condemning China over that and essentially saying that it is. So there is certainly a war over facts and, I think probably U.S. officials would say a disinformation campaign on the part of China to perhaps convince their own population that they weren't involved in spying. I thought something really interesting also that Javed Ali out of the University of Michigan, who has worked in the White House before and has a lot of national security experience, told us that, it's very common. A lot of Americans don't consider this. It's very common for foreign entities to spy on each other. The difference, though, is that they usually don't come down in airspace. A lot of this kind of spying is done via satellite, according to Ali. So this kind of encroachment, again, on our territory is somewhat unprecedented,
right.
And could have severe ramifications for national security policy and certainly our own relationship with China, as we've continued to push harder and harder on China, especially with restricting certain parts that are important technology for creating semiconductor chips, which has crippled Chinese companies like Huawei, for example. And so the Chinese government has a real interest in having certainly decent relations with the United States, and this does not certainly help.
Right, and most of the information that we're getting regarding what's happening is coming from representatives, obviously, with close ties to the Department of Defense. I'm going to read to you another statement, this one coming from Debbie Dingell. She released the following statement on the news that the U.S. military today shot down an aerial object over Lake Huron. Quote, the increasing incidences of unidentified objects, the latest over Lake Huron and Michigan airspace, are disturbing. We need the facts about where they are originating from, what their purpose is, and why their frequency is increasing, all things that we just spoke on.
Right.
Our national security is of the utmost importance, and we must work in a bipartisan way with this administration and all relevant partners for answers and the appropriate reaction. I'm thankful to the Air Force, the National Guard, and all our military forces who are working very vigilantly to keep us safe.
And another thing to keep in mind is the fact that bipartisan was mentioned in Representative Dingell's comment there. And because the Biden administration, of course, is a Democratic administration, the Republicans have been hitting them rather hard. Republican lawmaker Mike Turner, for example, who does serve on the U.S. House Armed Services Committee, suggesting the White House might be overcompensating for what he describes as its previously lax monitoring of American airspace. So it's true, of course, that there is a lot of politics involved, even on the domestic front, despite the fact that we probably should have a relatively unified front in confronting an international encroachment in our U.S. sovereignty and our U.S. territory. We're getting word now that the Pentagon briefing is probably going to be somewhat delayed. Okay. When we have information on when that might be, certainly we will bring you that information, hoping to hear from the Pentagon about what kind of object this was and the details of how it came down, and also more information on the recovery of the wreckage following the destruction of this particular object.
Yeah, frankly, right now, the information is very limited. We just know about the prior ones and then this happening just hours ago, and we're bringing it to you as we get that information coming in.
And for now, we're going to wrap it up. We thank you so much for joining us on any format on fox2detroit.com, on our Facebook page, or anywhere else you can watch us. We look forward to seeing you tonight after the Super Bowl on our air.
Yeah, grab those push alerts so you know when that Pentagon meeting is going to happen. Sign up for those.